It's been my privilege to work with PPMD and with Critical Path Institute for over the past decade and beyond. And my role today is to serve as an observer, not to come up with new suggestions, but to be able to help synthesize some of the points raised and to agnostically target highlights. So with that in mind, and understanding I need to take things forward, I thought I would bring 4 things to your attention. So this is not going to be a prolonged talk. We could certainly expound on a number of key points, but Pat and Abby said we couldn't buy sleeping bags for everyone to stay overnight, so we're going to have to move ahead with core points. It strikes me that these have been really dynamic, great exchanges, and to me, the underpinning, I thought of the quote from Satchel Paige, early 1930s baseball pitcher who's quoted as saying, "None of us is as smart as all of us." And the whole concept of platform trials is to be able to bring together the best of so many. So this is a challenging task to synthesize things into a few brief points. I'll apologize to you if I haven't chosen your favorites. But I'd like to just talk a little bit about stakeholder baseline perspectives and assumptions. Then second, what did we hear today from a variety of the speakers and in the panels? Again, very briefly. Third, then, what are some of the implied matters of consensus, but also shared worries? What are some things that we felt had not been addressed or at least require more discussion? Fourth, and finally, and most importantly, building on today's shared learning, talking about the whats, which have not changed, which are the standards that FDA uses and other regulators and that govern trial oversight, the GCPs, the GMPs, good manufacturing practices and clinical practices and so forth. And what can we do to help use this as a springboard from today to move forward into very aggressively pursuing platform trial opportunities? And I'll give you something that helps us foresee or anticipate what may be going forward. Couple key framing points in. Platform trials are not meant to be the sole channel for Duchenne trials, as you've heard, but just to reemphasize that. It's not a protocol that is written in stone. You hear a lot of important discussion about factors. We certainly heard that in the panels. And of course, participation by companies, patients, so forth is voluntary. So that's key. To me, platform trials involve bringing together many threads of data to weave lifelines and to do so faster, much more efficiently, and that this is a great opportunity. And when we think about cross-learning, I'm struck very much by the experience I had 20 years ago with the early cancer compounds when, with pancreatic cancer, Gemzar was the first agent approved. And I remember vividly sitting through the FDA advisory committee when folks were saying, there's nothing available. What can we do? We need a breakthrough. And what happened there and with many other cancers that we can learn from is that by stepwise learning and approaches, we have the greatest opportunity together to make significant progress. And I think finally, as we move into these points, just being able to say a lot of what we all struggle with here is in understanding trade-offs and unknowns. And it's difficult. We hear your voices reflecting that choice implies what is not selected and the worry about what if I'm passing up something even better. So part of platform trials is helping with facilitated choices and hopefully with the kind of information that helps move the field forward. As we heard from others, nobody has the answers from venture capitalists to FDA to others, so using the best information we can for today's decisions and not regretting what may be tomorrow's. So let's just talk for a moment about stakeholder perspectives. And I think the key point here would be, while we all try to respect each other's differences, how do we bring our stakes together and move forward by finding common ground? And that common ground would be the importance of shared definitions of concept and construct for trials, and then some core processes. not that everything needs to be agreed, but by making additional or initial agreements, one can then build upon that as these things mature. I think the other thing to talk about is what were some of the key points that came out of each of these sessions. We certainly heard from our conveners, and I applaud Abby and Ed and Jane for what they have done, not only now, but leading up to these processes, and the hope that that ideally creates. So what we heard from our FDA colleagues, from patients and parents, and I guess the theme I captured from patients and parents across all of the discussions is you live in a hope and despair roller coaster. And any way we can try to smooth that to help with hard choices amidst uncertainty is really important. And then talking about some of the sponsor comments and concerns, and again, with the purpose of understanding each other's reservations or enthusiasm. So without further ado, I'm just going to highlight a couple points. Dr. Woodcock certainly brought up that with master protocols and with platform trials, it's ideally suited for rare diseases. And this has been a hallmark of rare disease progress, that what the Duchenne community has done with guidance, with other advances, has helped other communities. This is another opportunity to really set the stage for progress. So improving disease outcomes over time in a patient-centered development approach is key, studying multiple test agents and interventions and so forth, all very important. And if you boil it down, it's faster, better at cost cutting, better inclusion, and so forth. The other thing that I was struck by in her comments was advice about overcoming resistance to change and how do we visualize that and make it an accelerator. If you think it's easy to overcome change, try brushing your teeth with your non-dominant hand. People have actually studied that, and it takes about a month to reacclimate. It's a good illustration that as we change what our daily routines are, it's very hard to embed that, and moving from traditional trials to platform trials certainly is not going to be all smooth sailing. Dr. Dunn had some very important reminders for us relating to clinical equipoise, or balance, essentially, and the importance of what I think he translated from what we all had looked at as gold standards to perhaps an exchange rate, something that can be used in place of purely placebo control on a one-to-one basis. So I think a lot of hope there, and very encouraging the way the regulators, especially FDA, have engaged the community and sought to be open and attempting to collaborate as best they can. The other thing is the points he raised about endpoint validity, trial duration, the impact of evolving standards of care, and how all that can be perhaps more efficiently addressed collectively through things such as platform trials, although not limited to that. We certainly had some very interesting commentary from Scott and Deborah. I would say some on the side and tongue-in-cheek referred to this as the Full Employment Act for statisticians and CROs, but truly very thoughtful, albeit complex programs. And the complexity is important to embrace. It also is important to understand that platform trials simplify many of the procedural aspects that others may go through, and you've heard those comments. And it's not my intent to talk about some of the highlights of those, but rather just to point out that the very careful discussion about inclusion, exclusion criteria, and so forth, very helpful in moving things forward. And just to call several things to remind us from the panels, I was struck in panel one about protocol objectives and eligibility. One, it really touched me that Duchenne families know more about the disease than many of the medical students and interns that I've more recently worked with. That's unfortunate for you, but it also gives you a sense of insight and judgment, and thank goodness for that. The other thing that struck me when we talk about latitudes of choice is Robert Frost, appeared to my mind, because a lot of you have read The Road Not Taken, and that's something that I think bothers everyone. What about greener grass somewhere else? And that's an imponderable, so being able to make decisions and move forward with today's evidence and not hoping for something tomorrow that's better, but dealing with what we have is so key, and platform trials may help us to do that much more thoughtfully and efficiently. And we certainly heard concerns from panelists about needing more standard operating procedures, standardization of endpoints, both initially and add-ons. And I was struck by one other thing I hope we can capture here, that there were a lot of debates about certain points, 6-minute walk test versus 100-meter. Those are planks in a platform. I didn't hear anybody say that the platform construct does not make sense. It's just, what planks do you put in that platform? And I think that's part of the ongoing discussion we need to capture. And that was in panel 2. And I think to reemphasize the importance of transparency from panel 3 and oversight and change control are all things that are part of good governance that we would certainly expect to be fundamental moving forward. So I think all of those things are key. And let's talk about, very briefly, implied consensus, which was the concept. Again, nobody spoke up to say otherwise, certainly brought up concerns about trade-off and choices. But what we heard in concerns were related to details, global versus US, cost factors, who pays and how much, and how does that come about, the issues of choice and control, and then I highlighted type 4 error. Are you familiar with type 4 error? You know, type 1 is missing the conclusion of something actually being effective, but our approach is not allowing that, so we discard something very good. Type 4 error is solving a problem too late. And you always worry about debating about issues rather than starting a process and getting to the final conclusions that will help us make progress for these boys. So, final slide. How do we build on shared learnings? And I think first, acknowledging the whats are not changed. The standards for approval, substantial evidence, looking at benefit and risk, all fundamental and unchanged. The hows are what we're talking about, and platform trials is a different how than traditional trials, but it's not changing our standards. And why would we do it? I would just leave you with the letters QSV, quality, speed, value. Those are fundamental, different, and transformational things from doing individual trials. And finally, just talking about how we foresee progress. Foresee obviously meaning anticipation, but 4 things with the letter C that will help catalyze the community. First C being calibration, that's standardization, common lexicon, and so forth. Second, collaboration. Thirdly, communication. We heard a lot about education, and I think that was an excellent comment. How does that become built in and a sustaining element? And finally, continuous sharing and adaptation, not only of the designs, but as soon as possible of the results, so that when we hit blind alleys, we know where to stop and move forward in different directions. So let me close with a quote from that eminent philosopher, Yogi Berra, who said, "If it wasn't for time, everything would happen all at once." He really said that. And time is now, and this is the opportunity for a springboard to quality, speed, and value. We can't buy back time. That's the one commodity we have very little to no control over. So I would close with these comments, thanking all of you, and our conveners will come up to say thanks, but I applaud the contributions of FDA for being here, for being so engaging, for what Billy and Janet and others have done over the course of the last 4 to 5 years through the guidance processes and so forth to help us move the community ahead as an example. And I applaud that. I applaud that patients first, and having patients and parents so engaged here is critical to these advances. And finally, building from areas of agreement, so coming together for consensus step by step will help move forward to these platform trials. So thank you all for all you've done, and give yourselves a round of applause for your engagement. And Abby.
So yes, I guess everyone's going to come up. I think we'll all just say a few brief remarks. I just want to thank everyone for the thoughtful and intentional conversation today, because I think that this is the first step in really trying to let everyone understand what we're doing, and we have no intent of keeping it to ourselves. We want to be as transparent as possible. We got lots of good ideas about how to involve more of you. I think we have some immediate first steps when we wake up tomorrow morning, which are quite big. But again, just thank you very much for coming today and taking the time out of your busy schedules. And we want you all to participate and your sons to participate. So thanks. Ed?
I don't have much else to add except to thank everybody for being here and to participating in this process. I think the dynamics of real engagement early in the process and then continuously through the process is essential to any of these efforts. And all of you, show up, which is really important as part of the process. For us, I think it was very important to create a draft version of the protocol, so there was something to start with that we could actually talk about. So much time gets spent in us debating the esoteric that we need to make it concrete so that we can actually begin to work from there to get to the next steps. And that's a really important milestone in the development of this idea. The second one is really having this meeting. A lot of work has gone into thinking about and discussing these various aspects, but ultimately having something to offer and then debate is really an important part of engagement. And the next steps we've all talked about are really critical to take from where we are now to the next steps with some sense of urgency, which is certainly all of our intent and our responsibility. There's still big things that need to be addressed, and I think this community is up for addressing those. It's rare that you actually have engagement of all of the parties, including the regulators, taking the lead in some of these innovations, which has really been great. I'd like to personally thank all the people that participated in actually physically making this meeting happen, which obviously are a lot of the staff folks that have done a great job at doing that. All of you for your participation, and I think we are actually meeting tomorrow to take the next step. So while the end won't be tomorrow, the beginning will be tomorrow to keep the ball rolling. So thanks very much.
And I always love to get the last word. I thought I might just get up and say thank you and nothing else, but I'm just going to follow on from what Ed just said. We're starting tomorrow. We have a meeting tomorrow morning to take the input that we've got from you today, start going back to the protocol, seeing what changes we need to do, planning out the steering committee and governance more. We're onto it. This is something we want to do. We're going to start working on this as of tomorrow morning, actually probably tonight. There's probably more conversations tonight. But as I said earlier, we want to hear from you. If you have additional thoughts, you have additional insights, additional ideas for us, get back in touch. You may not have my email address, but you may have Abby's. If you don't have Abby's, you might have Ed's. Talk to us. We want to hear from all of you, because this is a community project. I think I mentioned earlier all the different ways this could fail. There's also many ways we can succeed. We haven't got all the answers yet, but we will. Abby whispered to me just as I came up, tell them we want to see them all back here this time next year for the launch. So I'm hoping she's right. Back here this time next year for the launch.